Ignition sequence starts.
Contact light.
Man's dream and a nation's pledge have now been fulfilled. The lunar age has begun.
Have you ever looked up at the night sky and felt a sense of awe? Today, we're diving into the story of a man who went beyond just looking up. It's the story of one man that helped make the phrase, "reach for the sky," obsolete. Buzz Aldrin has lived an extraordinary life. Known best as the lunar module pilot for Apollo 11, he became one of the first two people to walk on the moon in 1969. He significantly contributed to the development of space rendezvous techniques and is a decorated U.S. Air Force veteran. Aldrin is often misunderstood, and people's perception of him changed over time. Consider Buzz Aldrin as embodying the duality of the moon. In the brilliance of the lunar surface, we see a man of remarkable intellect and achievement. The moonwalker, the MIT doctorate holder, the inspiration behind the iconic Buzz Lightyear character.
To infinity and beyond!
Yet, akin to the moon's far side, shrouded in mystery and less understood, there lies a more enigmatic aspect of Aldrin's life, a realm less illuminated by the public eye, inviting us to explore the depths and complexity of this extraordinary individual. Join us on a journey through the stars as we trace the path of a man who ventured into the unknown and left footprints on the moon. Edwin Eugene Aldrin, Jr. was born on January 20th, 1930 at Mountainside Hospital in Glen Ridge, New Jersey. It's only fitting that the town that Aldrin calls home translates to Bright Mountain in French. He grew up in the nearby town of Montclair, the son of Edwin Eugene Aldrin Sr., a former Army aviator and World War I veteran, and Marion Moon. No, we didn't make up the fact that his mother's maiden name is Moon. His father, after leaving the Army in 1928, became an executive at Standard Oil. Aldrin was the youngest of three children with two older sisters, Madeline and Fay Ann. His famous name, Buzz, originated from Fay's childhood mispronunciation of brother as Buzzer, which was eventually shortened. Growing up in Montclair, New Jersey, Aldrin was a bright and curious child who showed off an early interest in mechanics and the workings of the universe. His education was a reflection of his interest. He excelled in mathematics and science, demonstrating a keen, analytical mind that would serve him well in his future endeavors. He was also a Boy Scout, rising to the rank of tenderfoot. He was also an avid model plane enthusiast. Aldrin's academic prowess led him to the prestigious United States Military Academy at West Point, where he graduated third in his class in 1951 with a degree in mechanical engineering. There, he would meet his first wife, Joan, while being a cadet. They were smitten with each other. Joan found his excitement for science and aviation both fascinating and frightening. He was the type of guy that would talk to her about orbital mechanics despite her not understanding much of it. Aldrin, in his youth, radiated charisma and knowledge. He would find out later in life being the smartest guy in the room can be hard. At the time, the Air Force had no officer academy, so West Point cadets could commission in the Air Force to become pilots. Second Lieutenant Aldrin then underwent flight training in Florida and Nevada before being assigned to the 16th Fighter Interceptor Squadron in Korea. During the Korean War, he flew 66 combat missions in F-86 Sabre jets, pictured here. Demonstrating exceptional skill and bravery for his service, he was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross for his outstanding ability, aerial combat prowess, and dedication to duty. After the Korean War, Aldrin continued his military career by serving as an aerial gunner instructor at Nellis Air Force Base in Nevada, and later as an aide to the Dean of Faculty at the Air Force Academy. His dedication to advancing his knowledge and skills led him to earn a doctorate of science in astronautics from MIT in 1963, where his thesis focused on man-space rendezvous. We'll have a link below so you can look at it. I did and understood absolutely none of it. However, the academic pursuit not only highlighted his intellectual capabilities, but also positioned him as an expert in a field that would soon become central to America's space exploration efforts. Let's back up to 1961 for a minute. Aldrin, to our knowledge, has not written about watching Alan B. Shepard's flight into space. When Shepard went into Earth's atmosphere, the race was on. We don't know if he ever thought he would become a part of the space race, but all the same, the sky was no longer the limit. Kennedy announced just a few months later after Shepard's flight that the United States would set their sights on the moon. To get there, NASA needed astronauts. Aldrin, like many in his generation, was on a rendezvous with destiny. NASA was specifically looking for candidates with a strong background in engineering or physical sciences, and military test piloting experience was highly regarded. Aldrin's combination of academic credentials in aerospace engineering, his experience as a fighter pilot in the Korean War, made him an exceptionally qualified candidate. Aldrin was selected as part of NASA's third group of astronauts in 1963. Astronaut Group 3, or known in the astronaut office as the 14, had some excellent astronauts in it. They included Dave Scott, Bill Anders, Michael Collins, Gene Cernan, and Alan Bean. This group was the first to include civilians, although Aldrin, with his military background, was not among those. Project Gemini was NASA's second human spaceflight program, conducted between projects Mercury and Apollo from 1961 to 1966. The project was instrumental in the United States' path to landing astronauts on the moon by the end of the 1960s, as part of the broader space race with the Soviet Union. The goals of Project Gemini were as follows: to demonstrate endurance of humans and equipment in space for extended periods, sufficient for a lunar mission; to perfect the methods of re-entry and landing the spacecraft back on Earth's surface; to develop and test the techniques for advanced space operations, notably rendezvous and docking of two spacecraft in orbit, and extravehicular activity, EVA, or spacewalks. Or, as Gene Kranz put it, we had to learn to drink from a fire hose. Gemini spacecrafts were designed to support 2 astronauts, a significant advancement over the single-seat Mercury capsules. They featured onboard computers for orbital maneuvers, a more sophisticated control system for re-entry, and the capability to change orbits. The Gemini spacecraft were launched into space by the Titan II GLV rocket, a modified intercontinental ballistic missile, ICBM. The pilots of these craft were astounded at just how good the controls were. They could maneuver the craft inch by inch. Here are some of the key moments of Gemini before Aldrin took his first flight into space. Edward H. White II performed the first American spacewalk during Gemini 4, demonstrating that astronauts could walk outside the spacecraft. Gemini 5 demonstrated that astronauts could survive in space for the duration required to reach the moon and back, spending 8 days in orbit. Gemini 6A and Gemini 7 accomplished the first rendezvous in space with 2 spacecraft maneuvering to come within a few feet and even inches of each other. Gemini 8 achieved the first docking with an Agena target vehicle, though the mission encountered difficulties that led to an early return to Earth. This was well depicted in the movie First Man.
Slowly in RCS direct.
It showed the astronauts in grave peril and mission control helpless. Gemini spacecraft were among the first to use computer-guided re-entry processes, significantly improving landing accuracy and safety. Project Gemini played a crucial role in the space race, a period of Cold War competition between the United States and the Soviet Union for supremacy in space exploration. Through its achievements, the United States demonstrated significant advancements in space technology and operations, setting the stage for the Apollo moon landings. The program's success in developing spaceflight techniques and human endurance in space was crucial in catching up and to eventually surpassing Soviet achievements in human spaceflight. Project Gemini would end on a high note thanks to two astronauts. This here is Commander James Lovell Jr. His first space flight was Gemini 7, which was basically a flight where NASA could torture the crew in a Machiavellian way. They were shoved inside this tin can for 2 weeks. Although the craft itself is the size of a small minivan, the astronauts could only eat, breathe, sleep, and use the bathroom in what is comparable to the backseat of a van. Buzz Aldrin's performance during Gemini 12's mission showcased his skills in spacewalking, contributing to his selection for the Apollo 11 moon landing mission. The mission was jammed-packed with things for these two to do. Gemini 12 aimed to perfect rendezvous and docking techniques with an Agena target vehicle and conduct a series of extravehicular activities, EVAs, or spacewalks. These objectives were crucial for proving that astronauts could perform the task required for future moon landing, such as moving and working comfortably in the vacuum of space. Aldrin would have the most successful moonwalks thanks to his simple approach to training. He was a qualified diver and thought it would be good practice to accomplish everything in space. Buzz Aldrin conducted 3 EVAs, including 2 stand-up EVAs where he stood up in the open hatch of the Gemini spacecraft and 1 tethered EVA. These EVAs demonstrated techniques for effectively working outside the spacecraft, including the use of handholds and tethers to manage the astronauts' movements in microgravity. Prior to this, spacewalking had been incredibly hard. Ed White's famous spacewalk was mostly just to see if he could do it. He had very little to accomplish except to have some fun. In fact, he needed to be told by the flight director personally to get back in the spacecraft, since he was ignoring the Capcom order. I don't blame him. It looks like fun. For Gemini 12, the mission carried out a series of scientific experiments, including photography of the Earth and stars, which provided valuable data for future missions. Gemini 12 marked the culmination of the Gemini program, demonstrating the United States' growing capabilities in space. The mission's success in achieving its docking and EVA objectives addressed many of the uncertainties surrounding human capabilities in space, particularly in conducting spacewalks and complex maneuvers like docking. These achievements were crucial for the confidence and technical foundation needed for the Apollo mission, which would land humans on the moon just a few years later. By the end of Gemini 12, NASA had developed and tested the technologies and procedures necessary for extended human spaceflight, rendezvous, docking, and EVAs. This progress was instrumental in the success of subsequent Apollo programs, highlighting the importance of Gemini 12 as a bridge between Earth orbital missions and lunar exploration. Astronauts in the Apollo program underwent rigorous training to prepare for their missions. This training included physical exercises, simulations, and studying spacecraft and lunar geology. Believe it or not, they used the position of the stars for directions. The astronauts also practiced in simulators that mimicked the conditions of space and lunar surface, including reduced gravity environments. This even included the practice of picking up rocks to hit some of NASA's scientific goals. Here is Buzz commenting on geology training leading up to the moon landing.
Going through geology training, and frankly, it was a real eye-opener to me. But somehow it just seemed a little make-believe for us to be geologists for that brief period of time.
By the way, it's worth pointing out that the cell phone in your pocket has more computing power in it than the entire Apollo module. Why haven't we been back to the moon? Or gone to Mars yet? I mean, my refrigerator talks to me. Crew assignments for the Apollo missions were subject to change based on various factors, including performance, health, and team dynamics. Initially, astronauts were assigned to 3-man crews: prime, backup, and support. This system ensured that there were always trained astronauts ready to step in if necessary. Buzz Aldrin was initially a part of the backup crew for Apollo 8, but was later reassigned to the prime crew of Apollo 11 as the lunar module pilot. All of this was spearheaded by the genius chief of crew operations, Deke Slayton. It's important to note that he made all these decisions without influence, political pressure, or corruption. He chose the right guy when it mattered. The success of the Apollo missions relied heavily on the effective teamwork and communication between astronauts. Crew members needed to work closely together, both in training and during the missions. The dynamic between Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins on Apollo 11 is a prime example of effective team collaboration. Aldrin's role was critical during the lunar landing phase, where his expertise in rendezvous and docking procedures was vital. Despite occasional disagreements and the high-pressure environment, the Apollo 11 crew worked seamlessly towards their historic achievement. Buzz Aldrin's contributions to the Apollo program were multifaceted. His doctoral thesis on manned orbital rendezvous laid the groundwork for the techniques used in the Apollo missions to rendezvous in lunar orbit. On Apollo 11, Aldrin and Armstrong performed the first manned lunar landing, with Aldrin being the second human to set foot on the moon. His actions on the lunar surface, including setting up experiments, collecting moon rock samples, and taking iconic photographs, were crucial to the mission's success. Let's talk about the landing for a minute. On July 20th, 1969, the lunar module named Eagle separated from the command module Columbia, where Collins remained in orbit. It's interesting to think about Collins, all alone in the space module. No person in history at that moment had been separated from people and Earth further than anybody before. We would see it as loneliness. Collins said he did just fine in his happy little home. Armstrong and Aldrin descended to the lunar surface in the Eagle, navigating challenges such as computer overload alerts and fuel concerns. With just an estimated 17 seconds of fuel remaining, Buzz and Neil deserve complete respect for staying calm and academic during this entire moment. But as the anticipation built and the rapid heart rates around the globe intensified, it was time to land or abort.
He thinks you're a little long downrange.
That's right. I think we confirmed that.
We confirm that.
Roger.
Altitude rate was 370. Roger, about 3 seconds long. Going over.
Okay, all flight controllers, I'm going around the horn.
Okay, now watch
You're
that
gonna go
signal
based on the data you had for an LOS. I see we got it back. You know, a few seconds.
We're going, fine.
Okay, go. Final. Go. Go. Telcom. Go. GNC. Go. Ecom. Go. Surgeon. Go. Capcom, we're go to continue PDI.
Eagle, you said you're a go. You dancing at all.
Did you get that Telcom ED batch go?
You go to continue power descent. You're a go to continue power descent. And Eagle Houston, we got data dropout. You're still looking good.
Looks good, flight. Looks good.
You're looking at our Delta 8. Program alarm. 1202.
1202 alarm.
1202, what's that?
1202 alarm.
It's executive overflow. If it does not occur again, we're fine. It has not occurred again. Okay, we're go. Continue.
We're going that flight. We're going that alarm. If it doesn't reoccur, will we go? Roger.
1202 program alarm. We're go. Roger, we got you. We're going that alarm. Roger. Same alarm, and it appears to come up when we have a 1668 up. 6 plus 25, throttle down. 6 plus 25, throttle down. Still on our hot time. We can feel it in here when the throttle.
Okay, all flight controllers, go now. Retro.
Go.
Fido. Go.
Manual to control.
Telcom.
Go.
GNC.
Go.
Ecom.
Go.
Surgeon.
Go.
Capcom, we're go for landing.
Eagle Houston, you're a go for landing, over. Roger, go for landing. 8,000 feet. Program alarm.
flight. Okay, we go. Attitude hold. Okay, at hold.
100 feet, 3.5.
I think we better be quiet, pilot.
Raj.
5%.
Okay, the only call-outs from now on will be fuel.
Stand by for 60.
Raj.
Forward.
60. 60 seconds.
60 seconds. Lights on. 60 feet down, 2.5. Okay, 75 feet. Okay, here's it. Looks like a good area here. It's looking good, down a half. Forward. Forward. That's good. 40 feet down, 2.5.
After 30.
Picking up the test. 30 feet, 2.5 down.
30. 30 seconds.
More forward, just into the right wall.
Buzz uttered two simple words that were the final culmination of billions of dollars in blood.
Contact light. Okay, engine stop. ATA at a descent. Out of descent. Auto control both auto descent. Command override off. Engine arm off. 413 is in. Put on the door.
Contact light. The words were both beautiful and simple. On July 20th, 1969, the Eagle, carrying Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, touched down on the moon's surface at 2017 UTC, or 4:17 Eastern Time in New York. They made it, but for what seemed like an eternity, nothing was said. It took an antsy Charlie Duke to confirm.
We copy you down, Eagle.
Upon landing in the Sea of Tranquility, Armstrong famously reported,
Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed.
Armstrong was the first to step on the lunar surface, uttering the historic phrase,
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Due to his Ohio accent, we're not sure exactly what he said. There has been some debate over the years about whether Armstrong said "a man" or just "man," due to the transmission and recording quality. Armstrong himself stated that he intended to say "a man," which would make the statement grammatically correct by distinguishing between a man, one individual, and mankind, humanity as a whole. However, the "a" is not clearly audible in the recording. Tomato, tomato. Aldrin joined him shortly thereafter. His first words were nothing short of the nerdiest thing possible.
Magnificent desolation.
During their approximately 2.5 hours on the moon, they collected lunar samples, conducted experiments, and took photographs, including the iconic image of Aldrin with the American flag. Depending on how you want to look at things, Armstrong made the first ceremonial step, but both Neil and Buzz landed at the same time. A surprise to the astronauts was a phone call from President Nixon, which for some reason he sounds like he's just reading something.
The President of the United States is in his office now and would like to say a few words to you. Over.
That would be an honor.
Go ahead, Mr. President. This is Houston out.
Hello, Neil and Buzz. I'm talking to you by telephone from the Oval Room at the White House.
And this certainly has to be the most historic telephone call ever made from the White House. I just can't tell you how proud we all are of what you have done. For every American, this has to be the proudest day of our lives. And for people all over the world, because of what you have done, the heavens have become a part of man's world. And as you talk to us from the Sea of Tranquility, it inspires us to redouble our efforts to bring peace and tranquility to Earth. For one priceless moment in the whole history of man, all the people on this earth are truly one. One in their pride in what you have done, and one in our prayers that you will return safely to Earth.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's a great honor and privilege for us to be here representing not only the United States, but men of peace of all nations, and with interest and a curiosity and with a vision for the future. An honor for us to be able to participate here today.
Whatever, it was nice. It's neat to think of a president calling a man on the moon. I wonder if his secretary came in and said, "Mr. President, We have the moon on line 1. If you followed the program closely at the time, you would know that the launch from the moon was the first time anybody would try this. If there was a time to be nervous, it was getting off the moon. There is a great scene in the movie First Man that depicts the speech Nixon would have given had they not been able to get off.
Fate has ordained that the men who went to the moon to explore in peace will stay on the moon to rest in peace. These brave men, Neil Armstrong and Edwin Aldrin, know there is no hope for their recovery. They will be mourned by their families. They will be mourned by a Mother Earth that dared send 2 of her sons into the unknown. For every human being who looks up at the moon in the nights to come will know that there is some corner of another world that is forever mankind. Prior to the statement, the President will telephone each of the widows-to-be, and clergymen will adopt the same procedure as a burial at sea, commending their souls to the deepest of the deep.
But, as fate would have it, Apollo 11 would be coming home with all crew accounted for. Collins, in the command module, was probably the most nervous person in the moment. Had Armstrong and Aldrin not been able to get off, he would have had to live the rest of his life as a marked man. After rejoining Collins in the command module, the crew returned to Earth, splashing down in the Pacific Ocean July 24, 1969. The Apollo 11 mission not only achieved the national goal set by President John F. Kennedy to land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth, but also opened a new era of exploration and human achievement. The 3 would go on a worldwide ticker-tape parade tour. Treated as pioneers in aviation, they got to meet kings, queens. For the rest of his life, Aldrin had a message for people when he returned to Earth. As we gaze up at the night sky, let us remember that the stars are not merely distant points of light, but destinations waiting to be reached. What is probably disappointing for the astronauts who walked on the moon? NASA wasn't keen on returning them to space. In fact, only a few astronauts would find missions to fly after Apollo. Aldrin would leave NASA in 1971. Although it's going to sound a little hokey, Aldrin really thought he could serve in better ways now that he'd come home from the moon. Even still, what could possibly top walking on the moon? Initially aspiring to becoming the Commandant of Cadets at the United States Air Force Academy, Aldrin was instead appointed as the Commandant of the United States Air Force Aerospace Research Pilot School, a role without prior managerial or test pilot experience for him. His tenure was complicated by clashes with superiors and the stress of managing the school, especially after 2 aircraft crashes were blamed on insufficient supervision under his command. Aldrin's struggles extended beyond his professional life. He battled clinical depression and alcoholism, a fight intensified by familiar predispositions and the societal stigmas of mental illness at the time. His condition led to a 4-week hospitalization. In 1972, facing the Air Force's diminishing interest in space and personal challenges, Aldrin retired. We really can't imagine what it's like to be Buzz Aldrin in the 1970s, a man who is so intelligent, so ambitious, with no more moons to land on. He would turn his creative and academic energy into books, becoming a staunch advocate for further exploration. He has proposed the Aldrin Mars Cycler, a spacecraft system for sustainable missions to Mars. His advocacy extends to encouraging international cooperation in space exploration, and he's spoken before Congress and at the United Nations on space-related issues. Aldrin has authored several books about his experiences in space and his visions for future space exploration, including Return to Earth in 1973, detailing his struggles with depression and alcoholism post-Apollo, and those nerdy words again, Magnificent Desolation in 2009, which discusses his life after returning from the moon. His book, Mission to Mars, My Vision for Space Exploration in 2013, co-written with Leonid David, outlines his ideas for human Mars exploration. All of these books are amazing. His passion for exploration bleeds through the pages. Aldrin has been open about his battles with depression and alcoholism in the years following his Apollo mission. He sought to destigmatize mental health issues among astronauts and the general population. Here he is in the 1980s, looking un-Buzz-like.
Yeah, I'm sure there'd be trying moments if I did it again. But having gone through it once, I'd be a much smarter person.
And yet, Buzz, it almost destroyed you.
Right.
Aldrin has also been involved in a number of legal disputes with family members and business managers regarding his finances and business dealings. In 2018, Buzz initiated a lawsuit against 2 of his children and a former business manager, alleging elder exploitation, breach of trustee duty, and financial misappropriation. He claimed they had unauthorized control over his finances and made personal and business decisions without his consent. In response, his children sought legal guardianship, citing his alleged cognitive decline and arguing he was unable to manage his own affairs. The family dispute escalated into a public legal battle that underscored broader issues of elder abuse and the complexities of managing affairs for the elderly. The matter was eventually resolved out of court. Aldrin has made numerous appearances in film, TV shows, and events, often making cameos as himself. He's been a guest on The Simpsons.
Gentlemen, I'd like you to meet the 2 experienced astronauts who will accompany the winner into space. Ray Spanion and Buzz Aldrin, the second man on the moon.
Second comes right after first.
That's right, Buzz. Next, Big Bang Theory.
Here's a Mars bar. I'm an astronaut. And this one's a moon pie. I walked on the moon. What have you done?
And Dancing with the Stars.
But I'm trying to translate what is happening and then how do I integrate into that.
Which is, of course, something an astronaut would say when he's trying to learn to dance. All of these showcase his diverse interest and willingness to engage with the public in various forums. Aldrin has been a proponent of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics STEM education. He founded the Space Share Foundation, which focuses on inspiring children through educational initiatives in space and science. Remember this because we'll be coming back to it. Aldrin's contributions to space exploration and science have been widely recognized. He's received numerous awards and honors, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom. Monuments and institutions have been named after him, and he's regarded as a pioneer of space exploration. In 2023, Aldrin married Anka Fowler, who's a chemical engineer. Buzz said of the marriage, "When I met Anka, I instantly recognized that here was a woman who is the whole Wizard of Oz package. Brains, heart, courage. Now the 2 can spend their days walking down that yellow brick road." If you take anything from learning about Buzz Aldrin's post-Apollo days, the man went to the moon and back, and then went to hell and back. The man went to educate and inspire the world about STEM and exploration, and he never came back. When discussing Buzz Aldrin, it's impossible to overlook the persistent notion of the moon landing being a hoax. Documentarian Bert Sibrel has dedicated his life to persuading people of this conspiracy. Setting aside the overwhelming evidence from independent scientists, third-party observers, and even adversaries affirming the reality of the moon landing, including the Russian surveillance of Columbia en route, skeptics still cling to doubts. Despite the absence of any substantial evidence refuting the moon landing, one memorable incident stands out. Buzz Aldrin's swift right hook to Bert Sibrel.
Didn't. Calling the kettle black if I ever thought of it. Saying I misrepresented myself.
Away from me.
You're a coward and a liar and a thief.
The crux of the matter is this: extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. Mere anomalies like peculiar shadows or questions about the Van Allen belt are insufficient. These phenomena have plausible explanations readily available. Yet, buried within this skepticism lies a backhanded compliment to NASA, its contractors, and the courageous astronauts. The sheer incredibility of the moon landing's success is so immense that some struggle to accept it as reality. Our nation has an uncanny ability to have the right person in the right place for the moment that needs him. In history, timing often plays a crucial role in determining outcomes. The Apollo missions exemplified this, where meticulous planning ensured the right astronauts were placed on the right flights. Bill Anders, a nuclear physicist, was on Apollo 8, the first crew to travel through the Van Allen radiation belt. Jim McDivitt, a test pilot's pilot, commanded Apollo 9, the first crewed flight of the command and service module. These choices were largely influenced by Deke Slayton, the unsung hero of the Apollo missions, who thoughtfully selected crews to suit each mission's unique needs. At the end of the day, it was a rotation, but he always made sure the crews fit together. Apollo 11, the mission that saw humans first set foot on the moon, brought together Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins. While Neil Armstrong, the mission commander, was chosen by NASA to be the first person to walk on the moon, one might argue that Buzz Aldrin, the lunar module pilot, would have been an equally compelling choice. Michael Collins was well loved by all, a student of history, and often talked about Apollo 11's upcoming role in history. He was funny, smart, and could make friends with a rock. Commander Neil Armstrong was NASA's choice to be the first out on the moon. Flight director Gene Kranz once said, "You can look at Armstrong and you knew he was the commander." We don't think this is true. By looks, he has a boyish face, slicked over haircut that might as well have been from the engineer's haircut book. Armstrong was soft-spoken, gave textbook-sounding answers to the simplest questions. History looks at him as the chosen one of all God's children, ordained to history as the obvious choice. But his selection was far more nuanced. First, had Apollo 1 not ended in the death of Gus Grissom, he would have most likely been the first on the moon. God rest his soul. Armstrong had the chance to replace Aldrin several months before the flight. Aldrin could rub people the wrong way. Another Apollo astronaut once quipped, Aldrin was an amazing astronaut, it was Earth that he struggled with. But Armstrong knew Aldrin knew the computer inside and out and trusted him completely. The alternate was Jim Lovell of 13. Armstrong was not threatened at all by Aldrin, instead choosing to work with a skilled astronaut. He also felt Lovell deserved the honor of commanding a flight. We all like to believe that the crew of Apollo 11 were the best of friends, like the boys in Apollo 12. But this is not the case. Collins described the three as amicable strangers. Rumors for years would state that Aldrin and Armstrong didn't like each other. The flight transcript from the Apollo 11 flight shows that they were like two little boys on an adventure. This is how they thought of each other for the rest of their lives. They shared that historic adventure. For that, they will always be connected. Much is made about how Aldrin lobbied to be the first one out. For one, it made sense. There was precedent for this. The Gemini flights had the commander staying in. General military custom is that the top rank observes or sends in the troops first. This and his experience on the spacewalk would make him a great candidate first. Here are the odds for something like this. A human being has a 1 in 400 trillion chance of being born into your unique self. About 117 billion members of our species have been born on Earth. 600 million of these have called themselves an American citizen. If you were alive in 1963, you had a 1 in 31,000 chance of being selected into the Apollo program. Only one man would be the first on the moon. Imagine being that close. Wouldn't you lobby for it too? Who cares if you upset the bosses a little? I would have volunteered as well. Aldrin was known as not the most likable person, but everybody respected his intellect. Like we said earlier, it's not easy always being the smartest person in the room. We say the following, having the benefit of hindsight. Aldrin might have been a better pick. Buzz Aldrin, known for his media savvy and comfort in the public spotlight, could have effectively used his fame to foster public interest and support for space exploration. His lifelong advocacy for STEM education highlights his commitment to inspiring future generations in science and technology fields. An ethos that would have amplified the impact of the moon landing as a milestone of human achievement. Aldrin's technical expertise and innovative contributions to astronautics, including the development of spacewalk training techniques, underscore his role as a pioneer in space exploration. After all, he is Dr. Rendezvous for a reason. The man would have surely used his influence in a way that gets us to Mars faster. While Neil Armstrong's historic first steps on the moon are celebrated, the what if here is fun to ponder. That being said, history has shown that Armstrong's claim and deliberate nature were well suited for the historic moment. In hindsight, either astronaut could have succeeded in the role. Ultimately, both shared the adventure and contributed to the success of the mission, leaving their mark on history. We have slowly been losing the Apollo generation of astronauts. With each one passing away, we're reminded of the program's great achievements. We inherited their legacy. But with Aldrin, his legacy lives on as he does. He has bequeathed his knowledge through his many books. The man is in his 90s and still has endless energy and passion. In the United States, we often forget just how much we stand on the shoulders of giants. There is something kind of beautiful but terrifying about being at the top of a rocket about to go into space. As the Artemis missions approach, those sailors for the cosmos will be following in the footsteps of these giants, men that risk it all for a true journey into the unknown. This has been the story of Buzz Aldrin. To some, the tormented, to most, a voyager, and to many, a teacher.